After Patrick and Dennis were arrested, they were charged with conspiracy and obtaining money by false pretense before the Miscellaneous Offences Tribunal in Enugu. The tribunal found both men guilty and sentenced them to 10 years in prison. Unhappy with the decision of the tribunal, Patrick and Dennis appealed the decision at the Court of Appeal. During the appeal, Dennis' lawyer argued that Dennis did not know Patrick, Kofi, or Cosmos and was not even in Enugu when the crime happened. He also claimed that the prosecution failed to present any credible evidence linking Dennis to the crime. He also pointed out that there were doubts in the prosecution's case and urged the Court of Appeal to set aside the tribunal's decision. The lawyer further argued that Dennis had raised an alibi, stating in his police statement that he was in Lagos at the time of the crime. However, the police never investigated this claim to verify his whereabouts. Patrick's lawyer, on the other hand, made a similar argument, saying that once a suspect raises an alibi, it is the police's duty to investigate. Failing to do so, he said, weakened the prosecution's case. Patrick had also claimed he was at Anambra State for a funeral when the said crime occurred, yet the police did not verify his claim either. The prosecution, who was the respondent in the appeal, argued that the case of obtaining money by false pretense against Patrick and Dennis were proved by credible evidence. On the charge of conspiracy, the prosecution stated that Patrick introduced Cosmos to Dennis through a phone call, even gave him Dennis' house address and phone number. The prosecution further explained that when Cosmos met Dennis, Dennis claimed to be a dealer in the so-called granite permude, which Patrick had mentioned. Dennis then sold the fake product to Cosmos. Cosmos testified that he saw Patrick in Dennis' house during the fraudulent transaction. The prosecution argued that Patrick's introduction of Cosmos to Dennis for the purpose of selling granite permude was a well-planned conspiracy involving Patrick, Dennis, and the fictitious Mr. Coffee. Regarding the alibi defense, the prosecution maintained that there was no doubt about the identity of Patrick and Dennis, as Cosmos confirmed that he met both men at Dennis' house and later at the hotel.
After listening to arguments from both sides and reviewing the records from the tribunal, the court noted that Mr. Patrick, who was never in South Africa during the crime, called Cosmos, likely from Enugu, and convinced him to hand over his money to Mr. Dennis, his partner in the fraud. The court also found that Patrick lied to Cosmos when he told him that Dennis was a dealer in a so-called precious stone called granite permude, which was actually worthless. After Cosmos handed over his money to Dennis in exchange for the fake stones, Dennis disappeared. He was later arrested at his house just as he was about to escape. The court further found that Dennis, working together with Patrick, assured Cosmos that the worthless stones were indeed genuine. The court ruled that all the claims Patrick and Dennis made to Cosmos were knowingly false. This satisfied the first requirement for the crime of obtaining money by false pretense. Since Cosmos believed these false claims and willingly handed over his money to Dennis, who then ran off with it, the second requirement was also met. For the third requirement, the court concluded from the evidence that the false claims were made with the clear intent to cheat and deceive. The court therefore held that the prosecution successfully proved the charge of obtaining money by false pretense. On the charge of conspiracy, the court held that there was strong evidence to support the tribunal's ruling that Patrick and Dennis had conspired. First, Patrick was the one who directed Cosmos to go to Dennis to buy the worthless granite permude. Second, when Cosmos approached Dennis, Dennis admitted being a dealer in the so-called stone and went ahead to sell it to him. The court also found that when Cosmos later went to Dennis' house to demand a refund, he saw Patrick hovering around the compound. Additionally, Dennis' wife played a role in the deception. When Cosmos noticed Patrick's presence and suggested to her that Patrick was looking for her husband, she quickly denied it, claiming that Patrick must have lost his way. Based on this evidence, the court upheld the tribunal's finding that the prosecution had proven the conspiracy charge against Patrick and Dennis. Regarding their defense of alibi, the court held that the police's failure to investigate their alibi did not automatically mean they should be acquitted. The court further stated that if an accused person is clearly identified at a crime scene by a credible witness and the trial court believes the witness, the Court of Appeal will not disturb that finding. In this case, Patrick denied ever being in South Africa, claiming he was in Anambra attending a funeral at the time of the crime. However, he failed to provide any details of the funeral to the police for investigation. In the end, the court upheld the tribunal's decision, stating that the trial judge believed the eyewitness identification of Patrick and Dennis. Because of this, the Court of Appeal would not interfere with the judgment. The appeal was dismissed, meaning Patrick and Dennis would remain in prison to serve their 10-year sentences.